Hello everyone. So today, a video on the techniques and countermeasures that can be taken during a track, a leak, or a chase. So we are going to see together the measures that will allow us to disappear when we are pursued in a natural environment on foot. So we sometimes talk about counter-tracking, but it mainly covers all infiltration techniques. There is obviously a lot to say and experience to gain on this topic once again, and a video of a few minutes will not be enough to cover the subject. Rest assured that by incorporating all the elements that I am going to present here, you will already be much better equipped than the average person to face this kind of situation. And know that it is frankly difficult to follow in the footsteps of someone who has well integrated the fundamentals that we are going to see today. So I am going to clarify the initial context. A maximum tension point or incident exists, which won't be covered or elaborated on here. You manage to extract yourself from it, alone or in a group. From there, you're on the run with potentially a search team on your tail. So obviously, there are going to be countless situations, especially depending on your equipment, the environment, and the structure of the search teams. We can't cover everything, but we'll look at the general course of action to take in this situation. So today I'm going to talk to you about camouflage, about stealth. So regarding the outfit, I'm wearing the outfit that allows for good movement, an outfit suitable for moving through the forest. Of course, in reality, if we are caught off guard, we can end up with different equipment, unsuitable, so it will be an additional handicap. But all the techniques that we're going to see still remain valid and useful. And anyway, it's the type of situation where we are in a process of permanent adaptation. So this is where a minimum amount of preparation can be useful for you at home, in your vehicle, anywhere, wherever you are. A well-organized, well-thought-out bag will, of course, make a difference if you were able to retrieve it. So the first few minutes, the first 10 to 15 minutes are most often decisive. When you're on a really dynamic incident, that is to say an incident, the case where the searches that will focus on you and your group will start very quickly. So as a general rule, at first, you will not have to deal with human search specialists. So there is often a latency period on their side, and at best, maximum attention from the pursuers will last between 10 and 15 minutes. At first, there is often a temporary abandonment of the pursuits, and the instructions will normally be to freeze the situation. So it's a generality, but the first thing to know, so it is that when you are pursued, you will have to use this first quarter of an hour to your advantage. So we will see it a bit later, but in this kind of situation, we are constantly torn between two modes of movement. On foot, the first fast, which will leave many clues on a path easy to follow. The second slow, but which could be very discreet, very difficult to follow when using the right techniques. So if there is a time when we are going to choose speed in terms of mode of travel, it's often these first 15 minutes that are important. Here, of course, there is a notion of physical fitness involved, and the better trained you are, the better your chances will be, of course. So I recommend the Cutter's Test, which is done in about 12 minutes and will allow you to see roughly where you stand. For the moment, fast travel, easy track to pick up. Goal, get ahead. So one thing to keep in mind, one important thing when you're hunted, it's a race against the clock. The main goal during a track is to put as much time as possible, the greatest distance possible between you and your pursuers. All this safely, of course. So that's the main element to keep in mind at all times. One of the ways to achieve this will be to make the trackers doubt as often as possible in order to slow them down in their progress. If not already done, all communication channels must be disabled. So you're on foot, you have no choice. To gain the advantage, you will have to bring the enemy onto your territory. From now on, we will avoid all paths, drivable tracks, and cleared areas. We're even going to avoid traveling parallel to drivable tracks, and we'll seek out perpendicular routes through the vegetation as much as possible. So for this part of the journey, count on about 50 minutes of walking for 10 minutes of rest when possible. This is a classic pace that will allow you to last a long time, even if you are in a group and poorly trained. So under these conditions, know that we do about a maximum of 5 kilometers per day. So here, typically, we are in an asymmetric situation. The more crowded the area is, the more you'll be at an advantage. So here, you'll need to switch to rustic mode, as rustic as possible so that few people can follow you. So from the moment we think we've gotten a bit ahead, we're going to start the technical movements. So these are movements that are going to be a bit slower, but they'll be much harder to follow. So under normal circumstances, as a general rule, when you don't feel in danger, make regular short breaks. Depending on the depth of field that you have, if you can see up to 30 meters, stop every 30 meters. Evaluate the situation. If you can see up to 200 meters, stop a few seconds every 200 meters again to assess the situation. So when you stop, observe, have all your senses on alert and move slowly so as not to get spotted. After a while, the more you delve into the vegetation, the more your heart rate will normalize. The effects of adrenaline will fade. You will be able to slow down and focus on the stealth of the movement. Now, the goal is to avoid leaving traces and blend into the landscape. Now, you will have to observe extreme discipline, especially in a group. You need to focus. No noise, no light, no reflections, no waste, no spitting, no traces, no smells. No smells. It's because we're burying all these waste, all these needs. We don't smoke. Fire is forbidden except in extreme emergency for hypothermia. For movements, we use gesture commands. We check the bags also in such a way that there is no noise, no reflection during the walk. Here, we are in tactical movement. For stops, we will take cover to be masked on all sides if possible. We are looking for a zone that resembles the others, a place that looks ordinary in the environment, not a grove in the middle of a meadow, for example. A zone that will also allow us to break camp in several directions. So if the area isn't wooded, we'll have to rely on camouflage. So in a group, we distribute the loads, if there are any, according to everyone's abilities, obviously. So we also quickly assess any medical problems, if there are any. So it's also a time to focus on the feet, so we really need to prevent absolutely all injury risks. So from that point on, your feet will really be the center of the action. So you need to be aware of that. Now, about groups, there are advantages and disadvantages. Above 3 people, discretion starts to get really difficult, and the signature of your passage much easier to pick up. However, we will be better prepared, of course, for securing ourselves and then for mutual assistance. So experience shows that it's the duo that's most effective in infiltration situations. So it's time to camouflage ourselves now with what we have to wear tomorrow. So if we're lucky enough to be equipped, that's good. Otherwise, the charcoal recovered from an old car fire, the clay are the usual classic means that we use in nature. So if you have a lighter or matches, you can also, with the soot or even completely charred matches, smudge yourself. We manage the face and hands. Very important, face and hands. So smoke black, charcoal, very good. So here, when leaving the area, we make sure to leave no trace of passage. In particular, no trace of our equipment if we have any. Even less, abandoning the equipment. So the more clues we leave behind us, the more our pursuers are going to learn about us and will adapt their work accordingly. So we're going to particularly try to find out how you're equipped in order to assess your autonomy, but also to what extent you pose a threat to the team tracking you. So we're also going to try to find out if you've been able to rest or eat in order to determine your potential. We're going to try to find out if you have any injuries in order to know if you'll be slowed down or even if you'll change your objective quickly, which could be favorable or even dangerous for the people tracking you. So, depending on the situation, in any case, you can be sure that special attention will be paid to your resting place if it is discovered. Let's go. So now, left on the ground, and more broadly, the identification of the individual's approach, which is the main subject of track operators. It should be known that your shoes model will be scrupulously examined, and it will give information about your ability to move around the field, your technical preparation, maybe even your physical preparation, your hardening, but also about your psychological profile. So if you are dealing with professional teams, there will be on their side a search for reference traces. So you will need to find clear marks that will be photographed, drawn with all their peculiarities. So the shoe size, the length of the foot, the width of the foot, the stride length, the stride width, the stride angle, the heel strike, etc. Everything will be analyzed. We can even detect walking disorders in a particular individual. It will allow us to determine the number of individuals in the group and possibly enumerate them. So to highlight them, we will use paint bombs to bring out the traces or grazing lights of different colors depending on the nature of the ground. So if you don't have the equipment, you can also get down to ground level and use the sun to properly analyze the tracks. So we can analyze the dynamics of the footprint, and depending on the nature of the ground, the load, the fatigue of the individual, you will have different characteristics. So if you're running, trotting, your tracks will be less identifiable than when walking. When we walk, we start by imprinting the heel. It's the first impact on the ground. Then you have the foot rolling, followed by the push of the toes. That's the propulsion phase. It's the pattern that leaves the most traces on the ground, walking. And typically, the heel marks are where we will gather the most information. When you're jogging, you're running, there's a lot less support phase, and the support is focused much more on the front of the foot. So in areas where the prints are going to be very visible, if you want to disturb the trackers and keep a good pace, put yourself at a run, you will be much less well identified. So it will be much more difficult to match the reference prints with this type of print. So it's important to understand that for a tracker, the most important thing is to verify his assumptions and to constantly see and constantly verify if his track is the right one. The big pitfall for a tracker is to be in the dark. If he's wrong, he can waste precious hours for an entire team, several hours. So, the more he is in the dark, the more he will seek to verify his assumptions, and the more his team will be slowed down. So when it comes to deception techniques, tricks, there is the technique of walking backwards, obviously. So be careful. These are footprints that are often easy to decipher by trackers, by professionals, because the foot's pivot is in reverse of the natural pivot. So it can be seen when you know what you're looking for. Worse, when a tracker finds these types of footprints, They know they're dealing with fugitives or even those with ill intentions. As a result, he will be extra vigilant and generally direct his search particularly 180 degrees from the direction indicated by the footprints. Another more difficult technique, even impossible to detect, can be done with fabric or good socks filled with vegetation, and that you put on around your feet, not around the shoes. Because around the shoes, with shoes of this type, it's impossible to put on socks. You would need bags made of fabric or plastic. We rarely have them available. So these tracks, when you do it properly, around the feet, filled with plants, they are very difficult to interpret anyway. They are extremely far from the reference tracks. So for a tracker, it's very difficult to determine, and so it's an effective way, but you absolutely have to remove the shoes. So if you can walk even 500 meters with this trick and you combine it with other precautions, you have 99% chance of shaking off your opponents. Otherwise, no dog, and if the area doesn't mark too much, even if they are professionals. To end with these tricks, I also saw in the tropical areas shoes made of banana leaves or other plants, which are very effective, very difficult to interpret, depending on how it's done. So, with a stick now, it's often easier to pass through the vegetation without damaging the plants. So very important now, we will really need to be careful not to crush the twigs, not to cut the branches especially, not to tear off leaves, not to tear off the moss and the fern. So there is a general principle to know. It's that the less equipped you are, the more tired you are, the less seasoned you are, and the more you will seek the path of least resistance. So it's normal we are all looking to save energy. And whether it's on the tracker side or the individual being pursued, we will all tend to travel more or less in the same areas. So here, for example, I'm in the middle of the forest, but you have a beautiful animal trail that allows me to be much faster, to walk without hindrance. If you're being followed, bear this in mind so as to use a route that is not obvious. So the more you innovate in your progression, without it being disabling, of course, the more the trackers, once again, will be destabilized. So be careful. When you come to watercourse areas, the zones are often steep. You tend to slide. These are areas that are often very closely examined by the trackers as well. For movements in watercourses, we will avoid breaking branches and moving stones. So, under these conditions, we can go without eating for a week without a problem. You will be tired, but you will continue to walk. On the other hand, under conditions of stress and running, you will have to refuel several times a day with us. It's classic and it's mandatory. So be aware that in these areas there is always a risk. These are areas that are often visited and sometimes even monitored. So, under these conditions, the best technique are the purification tablets, which are quick and effective. As long as you're in a clay area, don't hesitate to refresh your camouflage. That's always something important. Near bodies of water, there is often the possibility to create false trails or to confuse the trail. You should know that a tracker following a trail and arriving at a body of water is faced with three possibilities. Either you have refueled and resumed your path, or you have crossed the body of water, or you have followed the bed of the body of water. So on these nerve points, it's fairly easy to create a false trail without losing too much time. In hilly areas, we try to walk about 2/3 of the slope in order to be as invisible as possible and to allow ourselves the opportunity to take cover either downward or upward fairly quickly. So you should never walk along the ridge lines where your profile stands out, cuts out clearly. When there's no other choice to cross an open area, we lower our profile as much as possible, and if necessary, we crawl. Without night vision goggles, without equipment for night vision, movements in pitch black night, even in the forest at night, are impossible or nearly impossible. So we'll favor dawn and dusk, but we'll rarely have interest under these conditions to stay in the area, on the spot, stopped all day. Now, about dogs, we know they are almost unbeatable in terms of smell, and the best way to confuse tracks followed by a dog is to walk in a body of water in the bed of a body of water as long as possible. Then on land where dogs will be least efficient are rocky bands and paved roads. Still about tracking dogs, the dog in a natural environment is very fast. However, it will have to adjust to the average speed of the dog handler. So it's a phenomenon we can exploit. The goal is to be faster than the dog handler. And that's often possible if you're on a cluttered, a bit chaotic area like here. And if you have time, you can also make some erratic movements so you can play on the loss of confidence of the dog handler and his dog. So the handler will tend to think that his dog has lost the trail to counter the thermal imaging equipment. All masks, all covers are good as long as they are dense enough. The best natural protection in this case being the rocks, the big stones that will store a lot of heat during the day and in which we can potentially slip. So as a general rule, the more you move around chaotic areas, the more your thermal signature will be attenuated. Generally, for a thermal signature to be exploitable, you need a direct view of the target. So at night, the thermal works really, really well, although now in the daytime, we also get good results. So, you normally need to be under cover at night and as still as possible when you're dealing with this type of equipment, especially when you're dealing with equipment that's mounted on vehicles, which is really very, very effective. Camouflage with a poncho or tarp combined with natural foliage, it's often effective, especially if you're not sticking to it. You absolutely need to leave a gap between your body and the camouflage. Don't move and you'll often be undetectable, at least for a while. You have thermal suits as well as anti-thermal blankets that sometimes give good results but are not effective in completely eliminating the thermal signature. In summary, for traditional night vision, camouflage is sufficient. However, for thermal systems and worse, hybrids, the outcome is more unpredictable. So when one is poorly equipped and does not have additional technical equipment, the possibility of detection remains high, and one must accept that risk. So the big topic of the moment, it's drones. There are more and more drones, thermal imaging in particular. Very difficult to avoid. So we use the same means, but there absolutely needs to be a cover above the head, a cover on the 3 dimensions. The problem is, you will always remain in doubt because this equipment is becoming more and more efficient, sometimes really hard to evaluate. On the other hand, if you are lucky enough to encounter heavy rains, you will be able to move around because the drones normally, for the time being, are still often out of service. During difficult weather conditions, so you will stay in a mode of stealthy movement, avoid any human encounter, stay away from dwellings, and blend into the environment.